Imagine a vibrant discussion between people that includes both openness and critical thought in the pursuit of truth. The Purchasing Truth podcast is an experience, a journey, an exploration of the impact that negative messages in politics and the media have on our families, community, society, and nation. Join your hosts, Bill Stierle and Tom Hazard, to discover new concepts and language strategies that will reveal effective ways of establishing truth. This podcast series will tackle current events, leadership challenges, healthcare confusion, integrity in business, and many other areas that affect us all. Gain clarity and understanding of the various truth perspectives. Welcome to Purchasing Truth.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Purchasing Truth. I'm Tom Hazard, along with our host, Bill Stierle. And Bill, today there's a big elephant in the room of misinformation that we're going to take a bit of a dive into today.
Yeah, I really appreciate this topic, Tom, because one of the things that misinformation does is it's counting on just appealing to the belief of the person. That's what misinformation counts on. It's saying this person is believing this thing. It's more exciting to believe and talk about unicorns rather than it is to talk about the latest discovery in science. And you gotta like shake your head a little bit about that, because wouldn't it be really great if we're lifting each other up through the place of that person discovered that. I want to figure out how I can discover something that also adds to the dance of life or the understanding of I want to participate in that. But that's not what's happening. What happens is that it's like there is a leaning towards, judgmental word would be laziness, in scientific rigor and to be a person that wants to create or work through a struggle to get someplace. It is hard. Anybody that's written a book might have this experience. Anybody that's built a business and has dealt with the different challenges over the years of what it takes to do that will know about the struggle. It's a lot easier from the non-struggle place, to go and to embrace misinformation quicker than it is to really fight for or adjust our belief to the fact that's true. It's harder to embrace facts because we've invested time in a belief. Very, very hard.
Well, and really nothing's more evident about that than really that nothing demonstrates that more in our current culture here in the United States than the COVID vaccine situation. And how, these beliefs have been established in a huge part of the US population that they don't need the vaccine or fear that the vaccines are safe or that COVID is real or isn't. It's, young people think, it's not really going to impact me more. It's just an old person's disease, or whatever their belief is. We're seeing it in, how the number of people getting vaccines slowed down to a crawl, where all the major big mass vaccination sites in the country were closed.
Right.
You can get a vaccine. It's pretty easy. You don't even need an appointment now. You could walk up because not many people there's not a lot of demand for people to get them now, right?
Right. Exactly. And that's a big part of it too, is there's an ease in getting it. People are under pressure, economic pressure, work pressure to say, oh my gosh, I've now got to got to go do this. Well, I'll wait till tomorrow. I don't need it right away. Wow. I'm going to wait to see how the numbers are going to go. I'm going to really trust to see where it goes because it was a hoax, right? Well, this is really unsettling because you take a pandemic and then all of a sudden you stretch it, further, then it needs to be stretched. I kind of would have liked this to have been done in 6 months if we would have got through it through mask testing, contact tracing. Very simple stuff. Anybody that's been around you, yes, somebody been around you, you need to do something, and we need to find anybody else that you've been around and where you've been around so that we can let those people know to get ahead of it. And that's really really problematic.
Oh, and that didn't happen. And so, all last year, everybody's looking for the vaccines. When's this going to end? Well, when we get a vaccine, we distribute it. So they work hard to distribute it the first half of this year. And a lot of people get it, but not as many as they wanted to.
Right.
And now we're at this point where the misinformation was coming very much from, where you'd expect it, where a lot of people get their news from: Fox News, Newsmax, OAN, the Daily Wire, things like this. And people were not trusting the vaccine because of the misinformation that was being spread there. And now what we're seeing, the result of that, the evidence of that, is the hospitals are filling up again. It's happening all over the country, but in much larger proportion in these states, which tend to be more red states, people that would be listening to those news sources spreading that misinformation. And, that's where all the cases are. It's 1 in 5, 20% of new cases are in Florida.
Yeah, that's really hard. That's really hard to hear, because it's like, and you can counter that with a narrative of propaganda to say, "Don't Fauci my state," or whatever, and you could try to counter that. But what happens is that it's a short-term boost to people trusting you because they voted for you. And I'm going to go with my belief that you're telling me the truth. I'm not going to, and you're telling me this other person's lying, or this person is, limiting the experience. Meanwhile, it's like, what is the worth of a human life? Well, all of a sudden, it's not until the person has and passes with a certain level or profile that, that people really, take it in and go like, wait a minute, this is serious. I better pay attention. And then all of a sudden everyone's on the same page. So,
well, and I think this is starting to happen across the country on this particular issue, the COVID vaccine, because the other really shocking piece of data that is come out and is absolutely, irrefutable data, is that some data came out about the COVID deaths in Texas. And it said since February, and remember, the vaccine was out, people were being vaccinated at that time. Actually, in fact, I have good friends in Texas, and Texas rolled out the vaccine to, people that weren't immunocompromised and other younger age groups faster than a lot of states did. I think largely because they didn't have as much demand for the vaccine as other states. But since February, there have been 8,787 deaths from COVID in the state of Texas. And Bill, do you know how many people who died had the vaccine were fully vaccinated? It was just 43. So that's 99.5% of everyone who died due to COVID-19 in Texas from February 8th to July 14th. That's what this data is from.
Right.
Were unvaccinated. So if you're somebody who has had beliefs that have been established through a lot of this misinformation and your sources of news, and then you see those numbers, I can imagine that's a bit of a shock. And it makes you question your belief, wouldn't it?
If the belief, it depends on the size of the belief. If the belief is it's a hoax, then that's a big belief. So then I'll discount everything. I'll discount the numbers, the reporting, the doctors. I'm going to question everyone because I was sold the hoax. So there was this one thing that's been trending, a doctor in Alabama. We could probably put that in the blog, but this doctor in Alabama just, she feels sad. I mean, she's, here's a person that she's putting the breathing tubes in. She's putting a tube in a person's lungs so they have enough oxygen so they can breathe. And as they're putting in, the person asks, can I get the vaccine? It's too late for that now. The it's too late for that now narrative is really, it's really troublesome because you had a chance to give your body a chance. Yeah. And you passed on the chance because you met your need for choice and you met your need for independence. No one's going to tell you what to do. No one's going to force you to do something. All those sentences can be the person's worst enemy because I can appreciate that a person wants to meet their need for choice and independence. So, and I can also appreciate that people feel scared and fearful about doctors, and they feel scared and fearful about vaccines. And I feel disheartened about the misinformation that the person that is in that spot is running through their head. I thought this was a hoax. I thought that it was like a cold. I thought all they do is rerun the moments of misinformation they've been given that has occupied the place of truth, because the cost to truth when this takes place is also, you can't be honest if you're looking at two different worldviews. You can't be straight with the person because the person is holding on to the worldview. So because this is a communication show, it's what do you say or do when somebody is saying, I don't want to take the vaccine? You got to be able to say something to that person. There's usually two questions that I recommend. Question number one is, could you be feeling a little bit more scared because you really don't want to take it because of there might be something around safety? Or could you be feeling doubtful and skeptical because you're really struggling with the truth or the trust that you have from the news media? Get those two things apart from each other, because those two things, when they're together, keeps the person not wanting to vaccinate or not wanting to go to the place of protection. For me, I'm up to 15 people. It just depends on the circle that you run in. I'm up to 15 people that are 1 or 2 degrees of separation from me.
Who died of COVID?
Who died of COVID. And also a new one that just came in is sick and in the hospital. So this is really, it's really, really hard because even though I'm meeting my own need for protection, even though I'm meeting my own need for physical safety, and I'm extending trust to science, and science is and can be a little bit of a dance. Sometimes they have a prescription and then they take it back because, hey, this thing was too strong. It was too much. It had this side effect. It kind of worked, but the trials didn't quite give us the thing we wanted. But now we're going to put it in a different form and try it this way instead. There is a little bit of testing hypothesis in science, and it's not a straight certainty. And this is where misinformation is fertilized. The fertilization of misinformation is science can't give you 100% certainty. Therefore, this other answer might be possible.
Oh, well, that's very interesting, Bill. And that's where we see a lot of organizations taking a partial truth and removing the context from it to
Right.
create misinformation.
Right.
And that's very scary.
That's correct. That's right. And news media has its own set of struggles with how to keep its own business shop open, attracting eyeballs, becoming interesting. And then also scientists have got to put out information and do tests and put hypotheses out. But Tom, you may have heard that red wine, is an aphrodisiac, or red wine is good for your heart, or red wine is what? And all of those have these, the data is is spun in a way just to get the tagline, not to really promote a full truth. Yet, when it comes to science that has to do with life or death, we've been softened. Our minds have been softened away from rigorous thinking about extending trust. We've been shown crop circles that don't come around anymore because it was a hoax out of England by these two guys. And then there were copycat people in different countries that started doing crop circles. I mean, it's unsettling. But that's the way until you can measure it, but they're all rotating in the right direction. It's like, and that's the way, that's where people's brains want to look at the possibility. Somebody's covering something up. We're not really fully getting the truth. And the answer is, well, you just don't like the truth that you're getting. It's not as interesting, because it's not interesting. It's not interesting that a farmer and his son went out at night and made crop circles. It's more interesting that aliens created it.
Oh, of course it's more interesting. And I think that's the whole point. It's attention for eyeballs, especially on social media. And, there was an article that is very comprehensive that was written by and published by NPR this week, which we have a link to in the blog post at purchasingtruth.com, but talking about the Daily Wire. And because it's very interesting, because this is a major source of information, news, if you will, for a lot of people on Facebook.
Right.
And this company, the Daily Wire, has become an influence machine. And it's outrage as a business model is the title of the article, and how Ben Shapiro, who's the founder of the Daily Wire, is using Facebook to build an empire, because so many people are getting the news through Facebook. And it's shocking when there's a lot of data in this article about how many people are engaging with this. Like, the monthly engagement that the Daily Wire has gotten, which is likes, shares, and comments, is how they define engagement.
That's right.
And of 9 U.S. news sources on Facebook, and 5 what we would call mainstream organizations, and 4 non-mainstream or conservative, specific ones, for more than a year, the Daily Wire has gotten more engagement than the 5 mainstream outlets: New York Times, Washington Post, NBC News, CNN, and Fox News. And then the other ones, including the Daily Wire, Breitbart News, The Blaze, The Western Journal. Literally, the Daily Wire has gotten more engagement than all the other ones combined. I mean, it is amazing. And how they're doing it is very interesting. They talk about taking a partial truth and stripping away context. And if you strip away enough context,
right,
you're going to create outrage and feed into people's biases, and you're you're dominating their attention, but you're also fueling this misinformation, creating misinformation, which I think the reality of COVID vaccines and the people that are now, dying from it, all being unvaccinated. This is one example that is a result of such misinformation being propagated.
Right. It's so huge. And being able to get clicks, likes, engagements, and be able to do that for a outrage message is a very limbic brain kind of function. It's engaging the fight, flight, and freeze part of the mindset that we have as human beings. And our body is built around protection. So because our brain is built around protection, it is protecting, it would rather protect a belief rather than rewrite the belief to have truth. Let me give an example of this. One of the common things that I do in communication is have people to change a certain belief. In order for them to change their communication, they got to change this one belief. And I tell them, and I ask them right at the beginning, said, would you be willing to change a small belief if it made your life wonderful? It's going to feel uncomfortable to change it, but if you'd be willing to change it, it's going to make a difference. The person then has to say the word yes. If they don't say yes, I ask them again, hey, listen, this is a belief. Would you be willing to do that? Yes. Okay, so now they've made their yes. They've got over the line. They are going to sit, their brain is going to sit with some doubt and skepticism. But I know that I'm going to validate it in a new way in a second. So here's the belief I have them change, that there's no such thing as a good or bad feeling, that there is no such thing as a positive or negative feeling. Now, this is tough because throughout their childhood, their parents' lives, they were taught, feel good, don't feel bad. Think positive, don't think negative. Right? Now here's this wacky communication guy going, there's no such thing as a good or bad feeling, positive or negative feeling. Then replace that belief is feelings are only indicators. They tell you how your body is taking something. Now, this is really weird because if you and I think about it, when we woke up this morning, we might have felt tired, that's the feeling, because our need for rest was not met fully. We didn't have a good night of sleep. Or we felt energized because our need for rest was being met. You were feeling thirsty and you met that thirst and now you feel comfortable. So I can do this all day. A person's feeling, our motivation is coming from a need. So what winds up happening when you're trying to change a belief, the person's going like, no, if I change this, I have to change the way I'm thinking. I have to change that person is pushing my buttons and I don't have any control over it. That's what outrage is. The person is pushing their buttons and they have their interests in mind. They don't have my interest in mind at all. They're just trying to keep me engaged so that I can be sold to by a sponsor, a marketing, an advertising, a branding experience. They just want to take offline my rational decision-making process. It's keeping the person in either the driver's seat, passenger seat, in the back seat, or at worst in the trunk. There are a lot of people in the trunk because they can't make a decision. They go, oh yeah, I'm in this car and this one media personality is driving it. I'm in the trunk. They're not even in the back seat. They're not even enjoying the ride. Ask all the people that are the 500 plus people that were arrested and files charges of being picked up from the insurrection. Oh my gosh, they're not having a happy ride. They're going like, wait, what? No, I thought, isn't Trump going to save me? He said I would. He would. He said that one time, I'll pay you the legal expenses. He says it once. An entire group of people believe he'll do it for me. He ain't paying your legal expenses. He won't even take your phone call. It's very unsettling. Do you feel how really unsettled our conversation gets all of a sudden?
Yes,
So
I can
unsettling.
definitely feel it. It's very interesting to think about. Feelings are not good or bad. They're just indicators. And that changes a lot of things, really.
It really does. Nobody can push you around anymore. And once you have that as the solid ground, it just becomes the other person's in pain about something. And then they're outrage people. So, Shapiro is an outrage guy. He's going to say things that are going to affect people's need for respect. It's going to elicit in loyalty. Loyalty is a very important need for us as human beings. It hooks into survival mechanisms. It does.
Well, and people don't even realize it when they're in Facebook that is benefiting from this outrage machine. They are not interested in turning it off because they make all sorts of money based on engagement. The more people engage with posts, the more that feeds in to their business model. And, in fact, the article from NPR goes into a little bit about how Facebook was creating a tool to quantify engagement of posts and, all some interesting things. And they shut it down and decided to stop doing it when they started seeing the results, because that was going to mess with their business model. So, but the thing that I think it's important for at least people to try to learn and research is that an organization like the Daily Wire does not actually claim to be a traditional news source. That's not their goal, to deliver news or truth. On its about page, the site states very clearly the Daily Wire does not claim to be without bias. And it goes on to say, we're opinionated, we're noisy, and we're having a good time. So what does that tell you about the information that you're getting through something like the Daily Wire?
Yeah, I mean, it's their need for connection being met at the expense of their population is something that they're not interested in having accountability for. It's like if you're keeping engagement to take place and it solidifies a person's belief against their own best interest, that seems like it's kind of like some dark, shadowy stuff against their own interest, which means that it prevents them from being for their own interest. There's clearly enough to go around. The challenge is, how do you get people to believe and participate in that collaborative and cooperative marketplace versus the way that people are believing is there's not enough, survival of the fittest. I've got to win. In order for me to win big, you got to lose big. And that's a little bit of the problem with truth and the misinformation apparatus. The misinformation apparatus is about building outrage. So the it's weird to say this from a physiological place, but 74% of a person's hearing stops listening when they're angry. It shuts off their ears. They can't even hear.
So those beliefs are going to be hardened.
The beliefs become hardened because it hits the person's ears. Once it tilts past the experience of aggravated and mad, and it goes to the place of anger, they just become entrenched. And then they're just looking for the next person that's going to reinforce that belief structure and reinforce that.
That's why these opinion shows on the mainstream media, Fox News, and, CNN and MSNBC, I think, are no different, where they have a lot of opinion shows.
That's right. That's right.
Those opinion shows are feeding into those biases and they're propagating outrage, and a lot of times creating outrage because that suits their business model. And that's why it's so surprising that this week Sean Hannity came out very, very vocally,
right,
seemingly without a ideological agenda, to speak very candidly about vaccines, stating that he believes in science, he believes in the vaccine. And it was really kind of surprising to a lot of people to see him say that. And I think it's a result of what we were talking about earlier, the numbers coming out of these states like Texas and Florida and Georgia and other states about all the people dying of COVID are unvaccinated. And I think he realized that's a lot of the people that listen to him.
Yeah, the motivation of connection with his audience and his sponsors and the people, because if it goes further than this and he were to stay any longer on the narrative, and then businesses would have had to start shutting down again because of his rhetoric, they'll just pull, and he has no place to go. I mean, it's like, well, where you just cost us $100,000 or $1 million because of the revenue we lost over the fourth quarter of 2021, and we're going to let you have it by never advertising with you again because of the money you cost us. Yeah, it's great. You have some eyeballs over there, but the money and the deaths that you caused because so-and-so died in our organization, they listened to you, blah, 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 that same kind of stuff. So the game of misinformation is really tricky because trying to get engagement, but you also are causing damage at the same time. And that part is really, really tough.
Yeah, you're getting engagement at the expense now of people's lives.
Right.
And don't forget our economy. I mean, our economy requires people to be moving freely, going to restaurants, and engaging in all sorts of activities that you can't really do if everybody's sick and dying, or if we have to take a step back and have more mass mandates or shutdowns to, if people aren't getting the vaccine and making this virus disappear because we get to a herd immunity.
Yeah. I think that's the thing that we can look at next, is that what kind of language narrative is going to be taken? Who has to get sick? Who has to die in order for it rise to the level of urgency? During the AIDS epidemic, it was Rock Hudson and then other predominant Hollywood and political types that got sick and died. So very, 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 very challenging for us to take this one on, because this one is what this generation's HIV was to the late 80s, early 90s. It really is. So,
it is. I agree. Okay, Bill. Wow. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate your insight and having that discussion today about misinformation.
Appreciate it, Tom. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to this Purchasing Truth podcast. We trust that you have enjoyed this engaging and thought-provoking conversation. Our hope is that you've received value, found clarity, and broadened your truth perspective in this episode. If you did, leave us a review or visit our website, purchasingtruth.com. Join us again for another informative and content-rich discussion here at the Purchasing Truth Podcast. Don't just accept whatever information comes your way. Join the discussion. Discover your own voice. Purchase your own truth.